Hi, my name is Joël Superi, and nearly 15 years ago, I questioned myself about the origins of the whale hunting in Pays Basque. And what was interesting is that the traditions and the vocabulary used by the local fishermen and whalers was Scandinavian. And so, since the Basque also went to America before Christopher Columbus, there are the two originalities in common with the Scandinavians. And the question was it a pure coincidence or was there contact and transmission between the two people? And so I began to study local documents to discover what was said about the Vikings, and very surprisingly, I discovered that in the year 840, the Viking invaded Gascony. They seized the 12 cities and got rid of their bishops. And the Gascony remained without any bishops for nearly 1 century and a half. And so when you get rid of the bishops, that means you take the political control of the area. And this early attack in Gascony changes everything. We have always been told that Vikings were looters who were avoiding battles, but since at the very beginning of the invasions they have a political ambition in Gascony, then it means that there's men who are applying a strategy, and in other words, they were leading a war. So what was the main goal of this war? To know that, we have to come back to the very beginning of the invasions and the first mentions of Norsemen. We often talk about Lindisfarne as the initial attack in the invasions in Europe. However, there are other mentions further south, and on that same year, 793, we have Arab texts which mention an offensive of the armies of the Emir of Cordoba across the Pyrenees. And there's troops who will ravage southern France for several months, attacking Narbonne, and the writer explains that they threatened the country of the Magus. Magus is the Arab term to qualify pagans of Scandinavian origin. And so in 793 we have an Arab author who is talking about the land of Magus north of the Pyrenees. The same one 2 years later is telling us that the king of Asturias, who was attacked by the same Emir of Cordoba, asked for the help of the king of the Basques and for the Magus, his neighbors. And Ibn Dari, another Arab author, evoking the same facts, said that he called for the help of the king of the Basque, which was the king of Pamplona, and he asked also for the help of the Magus who were settled on his coast. The coast of the king of Pamplona is Pays Basque. In other words, we have Arab texts mentioning the presence of Scandinavian people in Pays Basque as early as the 790s. And of course, if you consider Lindisfarne to be the first attack in Europe, it is impossible. And this is the reason why most historians say, oh, maybe these guys were not Vikings but Basque pagans. The only problem is that the Arab authors who are talking about Magus in Pays Basque in 795 mention that the same Magus attacked Sevilla in 844. If these Magus were not the same, the writer would have said so. If he kept silent, that means that they are the same men. And in fact, we discovered that the date of 793 has absolutely no historical value. And this has been demonstrated by the recent discovery in 2010 of the Salme ship in the island of Saaremaa in Estonia. Over there, they discovered two ships and in one of this ship were buried 30 men, young men who obviously had died in combat. And the archaeologists concluded that these guys had been killed during a raid. And they could date the grave, and the raid had happened between 700 and 750. That means 50 years at least earlier than the date of Lindisfarne. In other words, the Viking time began earlier, and the possibility that Vikings would have been in Pays Basque at the same time that Lindisfarne is attacked is perfectly possible. And I would even go further, since we have Scandinavian texts, especially we have Saxo Grammaticus, who is telling us that Harald Hildebrand, who was king of Denmark, had lands in Aquitaine, and the Chronicle of Leir confirms that Harald Hildebrand had made all the countries to the Mediterranean his tributaries. And so we have Scandinavian texts confirming that Scandinavians were in the south, as Arab texts do. And what is interesting is that Harald Hildebrand was killed in the 770s. That means that the Vikings were in Gascony and Pays Basque probably as soon as 770. And so the question is, what would this guy do there so early? And in fact, if you read the texts, the Arab texts, they explain that they fight on the side of the king of Pamplona and the king of Asturias, who are Christians, against the Saracens. In other words, this means that these Vikings were not raiding, they were there friendly. And of course, the main reason why they should be here is trade. And so once you know that, you understand that, you understand better why maybe they invaded Gascony in 840. These Vikings were sea kings. A sea king is a ship owner, and this ship owner earned their money by trade. And in Pays Basque, you had a major trading route arriving from the Mediterranean. You had a route departing from Tarragona, south of the Pyrenees, joining Fontarabie, Irun, or the antique Oyaso, on the Atlantic coast. And on this route, south of the Pyrenees, the Vikings were in Pays Basque could access to the Mediterranean world without being controlled by the Franks. And so this early presence of the Vikings in the Pays Basque country would have a commercial explanation. And of course, when the same guys decide to invade Gascony 50 years later, when they take Bayonne, of course behind they see Narbonne, and they see a shortcut to the Mediterranean trade. These guys were traders and were interested in commercial routes. And so once you know that, you can better explain what really happened in Europe. And of course, it's very difficult to explain the invasions if you ignore what they intended to do in the Mediterranean, what they achieved in Aquitaine, and with only reading at what happened north of River Loire. And the truth is that today nobody can understand Viking invasions, because Viking invasions have been studied only in the northern part of Europe. So I will explain all this in this book, which is The Vikings in Aquitaine, a missing piece of the invasions, and you can have this book on lulu.com on internet, of course, and please help yourself, and I say to you, you won't regret this reading. Have a nice day.